I'm John Beaudin. Welcome to the first of two parts where we talk about ex-members of Dire Straits. Well, we don't talk about them, we talk with them. First, David Knopfler, who was with Dire Straits for their first two albums and live at the BBC. The debut came out in 1978, self-titled. Communicate came out the following year in 79. But David Knopfler sounded like he wanted to sort of make his own way. And he was really standing in his brother's shadow, perhaps? We talked to David Knopfler, formerly of Dire Straits, on Rock History Book, our entire interview. One of these machines, Don Henley used to say, takes a lot. People don't know how much parts there is on an album. But this machine, which is an album, which is autobiographical and you're sort of a diary and all the pleasantry mother statements you want to throw out there. How long did this one take you?
Don't remember, to be absolutely honest. They take months. I mean, some of the songs can take several years. Some can be written in 5 minutes. This one came quite fast on the heels of the one before. Last Train Leaving I released the beginning of the year in 2020, and Songs of Loss and Love was out before 2020 was finished. But that's not really, it's not to say I started from scratch. I've usually got 20 or 30 songs on the boil, and I'll pick the best 10 or 11 at any given moment for the next album. So CD 21 actually is coming out as a best of. I've just sent the artwork off today, but CD 22, which will be, I've got the wrong numbers here. I think I might have just put the wrong CD number on my artwork.
You're too prolific, man. It's just, you're losing track.
The CD 21 is going to be, CD 21 is going to be the next one. And it will be, it's finished. There's 16 songs there, but I have to polish them up, and I have to reduce it to maybe 12, because otherwise it'll be over an hour. And that's really not very easy to digest for even a diehard.
We
Sure.
go down. First time I've heard Byzantine mentioned in a lyric. I'm thinking something devious is going on here.
I might need to get this album out to check what you're talking about. It's about, of course, it's the borderline, patrolling the borderline. Well, it was about Trump and all that bullshit that was going on with those kids being locked up and abandoned and treated like crap. This is still a crisis now, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that was, I kind of I like my wife's illustration for it there.
Oh, she did that, huh?
Yeah. Poppy in a boat. Yeah, the mother of exiles. I mean, you know what that is. Of course, it's come all ye huddle to him to breathe free, and we'll take you down. And as you see, I think I originally wrote and we'll something ruder than that. I can't remember the exact lyric, but it's the treatment of refugees, which is in America of all places, where they always prided themselves on treating refugees well. The Statue of Liberty. Yeah. So that's what that song was about.
When you do live shows, do you ever do, your brother wrote the songs, but you were part of the making of those?
Sometimes Dire Straits songs, rarely, but sometimes. Yeah, if the mood takes me. I've done Wild West End a few times. We did Once Upon a Time in the West from the second Dire Straits album on the last tour for fun. If we're just sitting there and we're practicing songs, I might suddenly get Six Blade Knife we've done. Rarely. Sometimes you get cynical kind of guys who'll say, I'll pay you X $1,000 for you, and I'll pay you Y $1,000 if you include some Dire Straits material, which I tend not to do. I tend to just, think anybody that's that wants to treat me like that, I don't necessarily want to work with them because it's going to end in tears. Yeah. But, a set's a set, and I want to entertain my audience, and I want them to go home happy. But generally, in markets where I've worked a lot of times, and I've established it. In Germany, for example, where I was never off the television sets for my first 4 or 5 albums, I established an independent, space that was my own. But if you come to a territory where you've never played before, come to a country where you haven't been for ever, maybe,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't necessarily know your solo material, then you've got to give them something so that they can reference you, because then you will get members of the audience coming because of the surname and because they know about Dire Straits, and then they know that I was a guitarist in Dire Straits, but they won't know anything about that. I've made 20 albums since. So it just depends. Again, there's no hard and fixed rules about it. I'm not precious about it either way. I don't mind doing a couple of songs if it makes them happy.
Mm-hmm. A song about loss, correct?
Yeah, well, the grace of my girls. That's just my missus. That's my lovely love, Leslie, and our lovely daughter, Ella. That's just they were in America, I guess, when I wrote this. They were visiting family in America, and I was here in England because they're American. So I think that was one of the things I was thinking of. But there's usually more than one level to a song. You know, a lyric isn't. I don't write my lyrics just to please me. I also want the song to work, to resonate with whoever's listening to it, obviously. So there'd be something. There's probably more to it than that.
What about The Sun's Going Down? I'm not going to ask you about every song. I won't do that.
Well, that's Boris. You know, that I can't say that it's Boris, but it is. I mean, the sun's going. This is Brexit. This is what's happening in the UK. This is the stupidity of us leaving the EU. The sun's going down. The sun's going down all the way. But I opened it with a song. So you'd have to be British to know this. But when I was a little boy, there was a television program that had a character in it called Andy Pandy, a little, you know, puppet character. Very primitive television, black and white television from the 50s. And the theme tune to that song stayed in my head all my life. So I started the song playing it. And Christopher Robin was the other thing that as a little boy, you know, Christopher Robin and Winnie the Pooh, the original, not the Hollywood, not the horrible Disney stuff that they've done since, but the original A.A. Milne book, you know, the author, and Shepard, the illustrator of the original books, was a big thing for me. But again, around the same age, little boy. So I started with that. And then the song just took me on a journey from there. And it kind of ends with, you know, Boris, you know, Bojo the Clown, wearing only a frown. It's the emperor's clothes, isn't it? You know, these leaders that are lacking in any kind of semblance of ethics or morality. And he's sold out his nation for promotion, basically.
Ultimate love song I looked at. I wrote down for you shine. I wrote We're So Intertwined. Ultimate love song. It's one of those to me, that song is one of those songs that I could, because my first thing was, did he write all these songs? Because some of the tunes have this very traditional feel to them, which I love when I hear that.
Right. I haven't tried to be a revolutionary in terms of my musical style. It's all very rooted in 1970s, 75 West Coast roots that I grew up with. I haven't really traveled very far from there in 50, 40 years, whatever it's been. That song, You Shine, though, was actually written by a chap in Germany. The music came originally from him, Mario, and he sent it to me, and it was an instrumental track. And I don't know why he sent it to me, but I didn't know him from a hole in the ground. And he sent it to me, and it sounded quite good. And I thought, I could do something with that. And so I just added a vocal, added a melody, added a piano, changed it around a little bit, but not much. And I kept actually the original track as he had it, and just built around it and sent it back. And he was very, very happy with what I'd done. So we finished it, basically. And it's on the record, yeah. So Mario Stracuzzi, which is quite a complicated word to spell.
This Isn't Kansas Anymore. Is that just a Face of Reality song?
That was another one that was a co-write. Hal sent me all that, the original riff at the very beginning of the song, this very scratchy guitar. Hal sent it to me as an idea. He'd thrown it down on his phone, you know, as a sketchy idea, probably sounds like might have been an electric guitar without an amp or something. It just knocked out really, just to throw the idea to me. But I liked the scratchy kind of, sounded like it was going down on old scratchy vinyl. And I thought I could use that. So I kept it. I kept the idea, and I actually incorporated it into the song. So Hal Lindis was my guitar replacement from Dire Straits, I should say. We never played in the same band, but we became mates after he took my job, so to speak. And then the great thing about Hal was when he joined Dire Straits was he was, in interviews, he was super generous about me, which was, you know, for me, very nice. So, which was not, I think, politic to do at the time. I say we've settled any differences long since. But at the time, things were a little, you know, as they would be after I left.
Did your brother know you were going to leave? I mean, was it like the
Yes and no, no, not really. I think it was just, you know, we were all burnt out. Too many gigs, too much work, too much stress, not enough downtime, and things were just, you know, going from bad to worse. And I decided I had enough. So, you know, I booked a flight and came back to England, and I didn't regret it for a second, and haven't since.
someone says, "Oh, stick to your music." Well, like, well, how come a dentist could talk about politics, but you can't?
One in a thousand people will do that to me, and they're usually kind of IQ of 84. You know, I mean, why worry? I mean, if there are some people that really have this idea that if you're a musician, you must have left school at 14 and a half, and that you know nothing. I've got a degree in economics, you know, and I see no reason to pretend I'm stupid because I'm in the rock business. It's absolutely ridiculous, you know. Yeah, you use what you had, what informs you, and I've been reading books and you know, I'll switch to the culture channels on television every time over the trash. So that makes me what it makes me. It's who I really am. And it means obviously that I'm only reaching a small segment of the so-called marketplace, but who cares? You know, I haven't seen James Bond movies. I'll live, you know. It doesn't bother me that I haven't seen them. I don't feel any great sense of loss.
Brand New Day, what's going on with the drums there? Because I remember I heard the drums come in and I'm going, I said, that's kind of interesting. That sort of a galloping thing going on. And I almost sounded backwards, but what's going on with the drums on Brand New Day?
I think that was, I felt a certain, you know, when I make an album, even though I know it's a very archaic idea, I think of it in terms of being an album. And I think I was feeling at the time that I needed something with a bit of, there were just too many.
Sounded so good.
I think it was a loop probably. I think I probably cheated it with a loop. And then I think it's possible, I can't remember, but I think probably I then replaced the loop with the real drums. But I honestly can't quite remember how I did it. I don't look back, you know, I record them.
I find that so interesting.
And they're gone. And I'm busy. I'm much more interested in the song I'm working on now that was playing when, you know, we turned on. I like to work on what I've started for the first time in my life, just vaguely, to start doing nostalgia, which is, I think, that third song that you mentioned, the one about the sun's going down.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a little bit of nostalgia in there. And I generally avoid nostalgia as something, as a kind of, it's sentimental and I don't like being sentimental. I try and avoid simpering sentimentality. It's not, I don't mind being emotionally moving somebody, but I want it to be believable. Do I believe me is what I say when I'm listening to my own myself with my producer's hat. Do I believe him? I say, listening to my own song back. It doesn't have to be the absolute truth, but it has to be a poetic truth that I've got to believe it. You know, we know Bruce Springsteen's a multimillionaire, but I believe him when he sings about his difficulties. Yeah. You know,
you just said something that I really believe in. I believe in the term. Do you believe? When I was writing for magazines, in the 90s, I would read it and I would go, "Do I believe that guy?"
Exactly. It's your own editor, isn't it? As an editor, you look at yourself and you go, I've got to believe that this is, you know, I mean, I had a song in an earlier album and when I heard you lost your farm, you know, about singing to my wife, and I heard you lost your farm, you know, my heart went, we never owned a farm. There never was a farm. It doesn't matter. I believed it, you know, I believed it when I heard it, and I believed it when I wrote it.
What kind of a teenager were you when you were going up and learning?
Serious.
What?
Quite serious, you know. Bolshy and serious. I remember my girlfriend's mother always said, "You're very bolshy, David." You know, I was left wing and serious.
And for you,
not to everyone's taste, probably. Although I was voted house captain by the girls in the school, so
what's that mean, house captain?
Oh, sorry, it's an old archaic thing that they do in Britain. This ridiculous thing along comes with corporal punishment, where they cane you and we had four teams in our school, so you divided into a particular house, 4 houses, and they wouldn't make me a prefect because I was long-haired and, you know, dissident. But they couldn't do anything about the house captain because that was a democratic vote. And so the students voted me house captain of my, so I couldn't have been as unpopular as I felt, but I felt totally existentially every other which way an outsider through and through. You know, every bone in my body was that of an outsider. I looked at the world, they're all doing it, and I'm out here watching it. As a writer would, as all writers are, really, I think. Mm-hmm. I mean, you're a better writer for it, really. You don't consider it as I think Macy Gray said something about this many years ago. She said about her voice, that the thing that's a problem for you when you're a teenager becomes the very thing that you embrace and makes you later. So I think when I got to college, you know, and I started realizing that I wasn't alone for the first time, other people, and there were even books that had my ideas in them, you know, and stuff like that. So you kind of grow up thinking that you're in a neighborhood, you just got to get out of this place. How am I ever going to get out of this place? They know the old Animals song, we've got to get out of this place. Mm-hmm. That's the last thing we ever do. That's what you grow up with. But then you find kindred spirits, music especially, which is global and international. And, you know, you could be in a studio with 12 people and they're all from a different part of the planet. And they're all speaking different languages. And yet there we all are in sharing the communal idea of how do we make the best possible piece of work here. It's a wonderful thing.
Looking back, would you give your younger self any advice? Would you change anything?
Probably. I'd have to take a couple of days to think about it, though. I've been asked that before. Yeah, of course I would. Wouldn't we all? But do you think they'd listen?
No.
I mean, how would your younger self ever? I mean, if my daughter doesn't take advice from me, why would my younger self? You know, I mean, you don't know how it is, Dad. You don't know anything. You know, you know. The idea that somebody of 68 has anything to him. I mean, when I was 22 and I saw a girl of 30, I thought, why is she even bothering to go out? You know, you're just old as just in 68. I mean, why, you know, why are they still alive? Never mind, why are they still bothering to go out? You know, the assumption is that you're out of touch.
When you left the band, what was in your thought? Okay, you've left. Were you thinking, well, you've obviously had songs because you were writing songs for Dire Straits before. What was going through your mind?
I'd like to get a good night's sleep. I'd like to see my cats. I'd like to be in my little flat making beans on toast at 3 a.m. if I want to, without having to call room service. Yeah, I just wanted to be. I needed some downtime, and so I spent about 2 years really not doing a great deal. I went to America. Soon after I came back to England first, and then about 6 months later, I went back to the States and started working with different musicians, writing demos and recording them and working with different people, all of which helped to inform it. But it was about 3 years before I got around to actually recording my album. Yeah. I was in danger of turning into some kind of a roue, really, for a little while there. I think making my first album was really quite therapeutic and healing, and I needed to do it. Difficult. It was a difficult period in some ways. I think, but then maybe your 20s are, you know. I've been progressively happier the older I've gotten.
Yeah. Hey, what's your take on the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? I mean, I know that you weren't part of that.
I don't have an awful lot of time for it. They gave me an award, which I noticed was up there. They apologized later. The guy I was dealing with, I think their number one Uno, their top guy, behaved like a bit of an ass, didn't want to pay any expenses for me to go. So I'd be thinking, hang on, you're charging ridiculous amounts of money for people to come, so that only rich people can really go to the event. And then on top of that, you won't even pay for me to get there. I mean, seriously? You want me to come because it's a great honor for me? Yeah, fuck that shit. So no, I wasn't very enamored by any of it, really. But if Mark had gone, I would have gone. And Mark said the same thing. He said, if David's going to go, I'll go. But in the end, they made it impossible for me to go because, you know.
So there was a possibility. There was a possibility both of you would have gone?
Yeah, if they'd handled it correctly. I don't know what it would have taken to get Mark there, but he actually said to his manager, if David's going, I'll go. And I said, I'd love to go, but I can't afford to, I live 200 miles from the airport to fly to America. I need transportation to get me to the airport, and I need a ticket to get me to America. And then I've got to get from Boston to Detroit or wherever it is that they're. Cleveland, is it? Cleveland? Yeah. So that's 2 flights, 3 flights. It's a pain in the ass, At least cover my expenses. I haven't got a spare grand just to, $1,500 just to throw away for a vanity project. I can press 1,000 records for that. Mm-hmm. I got better ways to spend my money. I'm driving a car that's 15 years old. I don't swan around. And also, I don't really know that I want to meet people that can afford $10,000 for a ticket to do nostalgia. As you know, I don't look back. So why would I be that interested? I'm much more interested in, as Mark is, in his present work and what he's making, as I am in my present work. We're both quite obsessed about doing what we do, not about doing what we did.
You said you have a new album coming out. What's when?
As soon as I get it together. I've stopped fixing deadlines now because it starts to become problematic if you set a deadline and then you can't realize it. I now have patrons with a Patreon account, so they pay me generously every month to make my work. And so it comes out as it comes out, and I will play them the tracks as I'm working on them. Anyway, they'll hear them in progress, and then they'll hear them finished, and so on and so forth. So by the time the album's made, they've already heard most of it or a lot of it. The artwork can take months sometimes. You can't predict how long something's going to take to be finished. I don't want to go to ridiculous extremes. I remember working at Real World in Peter Gabriel's studio. And Peter was working with some fantastic musicians, and I would have given my hind teeth to have backing tracks as good as the ones I was hearing coming out of his studio as we were going to lunch. I could hear it, just Tony Levin and Manu on drums. Just everything sounded great, and it sounded like a finished record, and none of that appeared on the final record. He spent another 5 years fiddling around with it. Danny Lamar, who Danny had left long ago and gave up waiting for it to be finished, producer, wonderful producer. So I don't go to those lengths, but you've got to know when something's good enough and let it go and move on. Let it be done and move on. But you do spend ridiculous amounts of time, fiddling about. I can go on fiddling too much almost, things that you get to the point where you have 75 mixes that you've done over months. And if you didn't have the numbers to tell you which is which and when they were mixed, you'd be hard pressed to tell any difference between them. What was all that for? You'll sweat for 5 hours just fixing one note that's just slightly at a time.
Yeah, nuances.
Bugging you. Yeah. But you get so close to the work. Like, if you're a painter and decorator, it's the same thing. You're painting your house, you're decorating it, and that one little spot that you never noticed before is now really bugging you because you didn't give it a second coat, and that little bit that should have had a second coat. It's the same thing. You just get too close to the work. And so you're always trying to polish it, and you're always trying to improve it. The tracks can go down in 10 minutes. You're on the piano, you've played it, you've performed it. Sometimes it's a live vocal and a live piano, and it's gone down, and you've used up 3 or 4 tracks. And then you might use another 3 or 4 just repairing that one note that's not quite what you wanted it to be. Or one vocal line, and you've got the other line still whispering beneath it. You just want to, I could talk about this all day, you can fiddle about a long time. And you do usually make incremental improvements, but you've got to know when to say, that's enough.
The debut album is sometimes your life's work up to that point.
Right.
I know that's Mark's music, but you created that band. And what was the vibe going into the first album as opposed to going into Communique?
Oh yeah, completely different. Sure. Well, Mark and I were working for months on the songs up at his little flat in Loughton in Essex, which was just north of London. I'd moved to London I'd taken the social work job to be near Mark, but I didn't quite know the geography of how London worked. Actually, I was right down in southeast London. He was way up both on tube lines, but it took over an hour and a quarter or something to get there and back. So it wasn't the best of locations. But I took a job in London, really to be near my brother. When I went to see my careers advisor, I graduated, and she said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to work in a guitar shop." And she laughed, because in those days nobody thought that could be a career choice. Yeah. And that was, to me, it was logical. You work in a guitar shop, you get to meet all the local musicians. Sooner or later, you're going to form a band, and that's how you do it. It was just to me, it was sensible. To her, it was funny. So she suggested social work. So I thought, well, as long as I can be near my brother in London, that might work. So he was a lecturer at Loughton, and I was a social worker in Deptford in southeast London. And I was, when I first moved there, I didn't have anywhere to live, so I was crashing on Mark's floor. And so after he got back from college, from teaching, we had 2 acoustic guitars, and we would play, and things would get written and arranged. And most of the first album was there in that point. Sultans he had as a piano track, and that I had very little to do with. But quite a few of the songs were kind of, if I was a manager managing a young band today, I would say to the band, so that you don't get into difficulties over publishing about who's written what, I would say, take 2/12 of the publishing and give it to the band as arrangers, because then the band have the 4-piece band, or whatever it is, they arrange the song in the rehearsal rooms. As a writer, you don't realize very often, especially when you're young, how much that will change and affect what you've come in with. I mean, and again, it's different for every song. Some songs I come to the band with, they're absolutely finished. I've got it all here, and I only want that. I want that, and I want that. And, you can lay down the law. But more often than not, you come in with an idea, and you play it to them, and then they will play something that makes you think, oh, I like that lilt, or that thing the drummer's doing there, or that, that nice thing that he's doing with these, it could be anything that could change something. Oh, I like that 6/8 that the rhythm player put in that was originally 4/4. A little pause here, that extra bar makes all the difference, and it's
like the hook. Yeah, a guitarist could come in and give you a hook. A drummer can come in and give you a hook.
Absolutely. It's on my first album, Madonna's Daughter, I didn't give any credit to Jack Sony, who was the replacement for Hal Linders in Dire Straits, who I was rehearsing with in New York City. But the Madonna's Daughter, the first album, that guitar lick is Jack's. It gets no credit for it whatsoever, but it's pretty central. And the song was written, but he had a counter lick that really is integrated into the song. If I had my time over, I'd have given him a co-writing credit on the music. It's just how it is. I don't think anybody ever means, and I don't think there's any malice intended. It's just how it works. So that was what the first Dire Straits album was. It was, Mark was driven to do what he was going to do, and he was going to do it whether I was around or not. I have no doubt about that. But at the same time, I was there. I got us the record deal. I was instrumental in the arrangements of the early songs. We played together as an acoustic duo. So there was a lot of stuff going on.
Were you and your brother close growing up?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Especially in the period leading up to the first Dire Straits album. That was definitely the closest we'd ever be.
I know this is none of my business, but
you're right. But it was we were never as close, I don't think, as we were in 75 and 76 in that period heading up to the band. Mark was in recovery at the time, though, from a failed marriage, and so he was very emotionally open at that time to having a kid brother and tell him stuff. I don't think that was going to last. I mean, Mark's a triple Leo, and he was always going to lead from the front, and not always with the grace and dignity that one would like to see, but he was young, and success was really thrust upon us incredibly fast. I mean, there was some schlepping around. Sure, we opened with a tour opening for Talking Heads, when Mark and I were sharing a bedroom on tour, but that didn't last that long. Pretty soon we were in 5-star hotels in Paris, wondering whether, And people would say, what color ashtray would you like? You know, it was spoiled rotten by the industry too. Expected to be prima donnas. I mean, that's kind of what happens.
So he says he was talking about his interview with International Musician, where they decided to make him the cover story 3 months later. His roadie at the time, you probably know who that was, came up to him at the Rainbow Theater and said, "Oh, here's the magazine, you're on the cover."
Right.
And then he said Mark came up behind him and took it out of his hand and looked at it, and he went, "Oh, I'm going to be the cover next month." And Pick said that was one of those defining moments for him.
Yeah.
Going, maybe I shouldn't be here anymore.
Yeah. Well, I could believe that.
He said that you had said that good for you, well-deserved pick.
Well, you know, it's not easy to be a leader, as I learned afterwards. You know,
that happened to you. Yeah, you became the leader, of course.
It's not easy to carry that role. And some people carry it with more grace than others. I had a chat once. I was in Nashville with having a dinner, not a work dinner, a dinner where a friend of a friend happened to be the bass player from the E Street Band. And he very, very sagely said, "Thank God that Bruce had this incredible need to be noticed, to be seen." He said, if we were doing it in the early days, he said, if we were playing in a mall somewhere and nobody was paying attention, Bruce would jump on a table, you know, and start playing on a table just to be, you know, seen and noticed. I wouldn't call Bruce a malignant narcissist by any means, and he's clearly been on a long journey with a lot of therapy to make him the wonderful human being he clearly is now. But you need that in the band, is what he went on to say. You know, Gary, he said, you know, you need Gary Talent. You need someone like that to lead. Otherwise, what's going to happen? You know, if my band would have all been in darkness with our backs to the audience, you know, I was never going to be a natural front man back then. When I played my first gig, I had a big hat that hid my face, and you know, played like this and muttered into my chest. And Steve, my friend Steve, who gave me the first spot in that folk club, he just shook his head and, "David, you know," he was a natural extrovert. You know, everybody loved him. I was just such an introvert. You know, so different.
Your parents, what were your parents like? Good,
complicated, troubled. A lot of words. My father was a refugee, so that takes you back to the first song on the album. So I've always had a very strong understanding of how it feels to be an alien in a foreign land, and to feel alienated, as my father did and felt. So, I mean, he was an architect. He got a first-class honours degree in a foreign language, very bright, very capable. But with a difficult personality that was probably post-traumatic stress disorder from hiding in safe houses from the Nazis for years, and being a very left-wing activist. He was probably, you know, in illegal printing presses, fermenting revolution in the 1930s. You know, so that was him, firebrand. There was never, if he saw a good fight, he'd always get into it, and sometimes on the back of a bus, if he heard a racist remark behind him, you know, he'd turn his head and he'd have it out with them. And the whole bus would hear about it. I'm just wanting to, you know, I was 7 or something, you know, "Please don't embarrass me, Dad." But of course he did every time. And later you come to admire him for it, you know. But at the time it wasn't always easy. And my mother was long suffering because of that, I think. And she was a quiet English woman who wanted respectability more than anything else. And Erwin wanted trouble and found it, you know, time and time again. I haven't traveled that far away, as far away from as I'd like to think. You know, a lot of me is still very quick to see a if I see something that's a problem, I'm not slow to come forward about it.
Did they get your music, you and Mark, when you guys were getting into music, did they get that? Because parents from that generation...
No, not entirely, but they went, to his credit, Erwin went along with it, my dad. He bought Mark a a Hofner super solid red guitar, which was then £45. And for comparison, I think a Fender Strat was about 160 and 45. So it was about a quarter the price, but £45 was a lot of money back then. I mean, the Strats were just stratospherically impossible. We'd go past the shop window, noses pressed to it, and look at them and just dream about it, but we never could have one. So the Hofner was still a step above the Rossettis, which were the cheaper ones, So Hofner, he was quite the talk of the town amongst these friends, having this guitar with two cutaways, and looking red and looking like the real thing. And whenever he went out with these friends, I snuck it out from under his bed and played it. I learned to play House of the Rising Sun on it when I was 11, and he was 14 or 15, maybe I was 11 or 12. And so I played it all the time. He never knew, but every time he wasn't there, it was out and played. I was never allowed to play it, but I did endlessly. And I had a little Tommy Steele guitar as well that I played. But yeah, so my parents, they were tolerant of it. They let me have a drum kit when I was 11 or 12. And the neighbors at the opposite far end of the road could hear that 50 houses down. I mean, it was shocking what it must have inflicted on people. But I was allowed to practice. We were in bands and we did all the things that teenage musicians do. We were both quite precocious, really, playing in folk clubs and playing in rock bands. And I formed a rock band where I was the drummer, but I was better than the guitarist as a player. So in the end, I had to switch, I was never very good as a drummer, to be honest. I didn't even know how to tune a drum kit. It was half the trouble. I didn't know what you was putting. Nowadays, you go on Google, you don't want to know something. Then it was sacred and everything was sacred, secret knowledge, and nobody shared. Nobody told you.
No internet. Yeah.
There was no internet and there was no phones even, you wanted to meet a friend. You went down the road and hoped they might be there. That's nothing,
Let's say you're at the dentist's office.
Yeah.
And someone turns around, the guy turns around and says, "So what do you do?" What do you tell that guy?
It depends who's asking me.
Just a stranger. He's just a stranger.
If it's a stranger, I'll usually lie and deny anything.
Why? Because of the follow-up question? Do I know anything?
Yeah. I don't. It's just easier to lie to deal with it. I don't know. I don't lie so much as just evade.
But doesn't the energy change when if you were to say I was in Dire Straits, all of a sudden
it all changes, of course.